Hey everyone. So in this lesson, we are going to learn all about reference entries. And it might seem odd that we're going to have a whole lesson just on these reference entries for your sources. It might seem like, we have this whole essay using source material. Why pay so much attention? Why is the references page and the reference entries, why are those so important that we're going to spend a whole lesson learning about? And the truth is, we've established that anytime you use source material, you have to provide a citation for that source in the essay, the part that goes in parentheses. And that is imperative. But in order to know what to put in the parentheses, you have to know how the reference entry is formatted. And then you have to keep in mind that the references page as a whole has specific formatting requirements as well. So a huge portion of work is dedicated to the references page because you have to make sure the page itself is in the correct format, and you have to make sure that each entry is in the correct format. And if each entry is in the correct format, then you know what to put in the parentheses for your citations. Remember, the two elements of APA format are the design elements. And in this case, that would apply to how the references page as a whole is formatted. And the other element of APA is how you treat your sources, meaning what do you put in the parentheses for your citations? Well, you won't know what to put in the parentheses until you know the reference entry. So a good bit of the whole process hinges on the references page. So we're going to look at what the reference page consists of, but more importantly, how do we know how to create proper entries for each of our sources? Okay, so let's go ahead and start off here. Okay, so what we have here is a guide to creating proper reference entries. And what I'm including on these slides is information that you can find in so many different places. You might have it in a handbook. You might have it in a textbook. You might find this information, or you can definitely find this information online, apa.org, Purdue Online Writing Lab. And then probably quite a few other credible websites that show you how to create reference entries for specific types of sources. So what I'm giving you here is really exactly what you can find in so many other places, but obviously it's my job to teach it to you and show you and provide examples and take you through the process. But I just want to make it clear that what I am showing you here in this PowerPoint is exactly what you would find if you went straight to apa.org to look up how do I create a reference entry for a blog? How do I create a reference entry for a YouTube video? How do I create a reference entry for a website, an organization's website? How do I create a reference entry for just a random section of a website? Not an organization website, just a website. It's the same information, the same format that I'm going to show you here in this PowerPoint. But you have a place to come back to now. If you want to download the PowerPoint and save it, you have your own little handbook that you can come back to see how do I create a reference entry for this particular type of source. You don't have to memorize how to create the reference entry. You just need a place to come to look at and say, okay, this information goes here, this information goes here, this information goes here. That's how I create the reference entry. Now I just plug in the information from my particular source and I have the reference entry. You don't have to memorize it. Okay? All right. So the references page, what is it? It is a list of every source that you have cited in the essay. Any source that is used in the essay must be cited, right? Every time you use information from a source in the body of the essay, you have those parentheses with your citation every single time. No matter how many times you've used that source, no matter how little you used of a source, no matter how you incorporated the information from that source, every single time, citation. So any source that is cited in the essay must appear on the references page. And any source that is listed on the references page must be cited at least once in the essay. You do not include sources on the references page that you simply looked at during your research process. You only include the sources that you actually took information from and incorporated into your essay in some way. Okay? Where is the references page? Remember, it's located at the end of the essay. You type your essay and you get to the conclusion, the concluding paragraph, right? And then you go to a brand new page and start your references list. So even if your essay concludes with only a few sentences at the top of page 5, for example, you start your references page at the top of page 6. Why do we need a reference page? If we've cited all of our sources throughout the essay, why do we need the references page? Well, the citation, remember, it gives credit to the original author, right? But it also shows your reader the information they need to go to your references page and find that source, that entry, and then they have all the information they need to locate that source for themselves. So a reference entry is going to include, like, what kind of information do we need to find a source? Because in the parentheses, you've only got very limited information, like a last name and a year of publication, right? That last name will correspond to an entry on the references page. And when your reader finds that entry, they now have not only the last name of the author, but the title, where you found it. If it was online, it will have the exact URL that they need to click on to go to that exact spot where you found that information. So we need the references page to correspond to the citation. Now, there are all types of sources out there these days. And each type of source, you know, you need to really think about what type of source you're using, because different types of sources are formatted a little differently. There are some basic elements of every reference entry that will be similar, regardless of what type of source it is. But there are smaller elements, there are slight differences in how entries are formatted, depending on what type of source is being used. And we can kind of categorize types of sources in 3 major groups. There are textual works, audio-visual media, and online media. Okay, let's take a look at what we mean by that. Textual works. These are things like journal articles, blog posts, chapters in an edited book, magazine articles, actual books, dictionary entries, Wikipedia entries, religious works, newspaper articles. These are items that a journal article, for example, I can read a journal article in an actual textual edition, something I can hold in my hands and read. But I can also read that same journal article online, probably, right? So these are mostly the type of sources that could come in both forms, a physical copy of it and a digital copy of it. Audio-visual media, right? So this would be artwork online, film and television, clip art or stock images, podcasts, TED Talks, YouTube videos, PowerPoint and lecture notes, right? Online media, this is, you're going to think that online media refers to anything that's found online. But like we just said, even a journal article that you read online, that falls under the category of textual works. Online media specifically refers to, as you'll see, a good bit of social media. So anything from Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, forums on Reddit, and then a page on a website like WebMD.com, right? Or a whole website. And you don't really need to, how do I put this? It's not like essential that you understand, okay, a page on a website is online media. I need to know that. Or, a podcast is audiovisual media, or a YouTube video is audiovisual media. I have to know that. The only reason that I am showing you these categories is for this reason. When you go to a website or even a handbook to figure out how to create a reference entry for the source you're working with, those resources are often, broken down into categories. So if you know that a YouTube video is classified as audiovisual media, you can go to the section on audiovisual media and find the format for a YouTube video reference entry a little faster instead of looking through everything until you find it, right? So again, it's not super essential that you understand exactly where each type of source falls in these categories. It's just recognize that there are categories, and it will make it easier to find what you need when you're searching for information on how to format each type of source, right? So while each type of source, again, will have subtle formatting differences, there is still some common information that you're going to need when you're creating the reference entry. If there is an author provided, you're going to need that author's name. The author could be an organization. That would be the name of the author. If there is a date of publication provided, you're going to need that. You're going to need the title. If it's an online source, even a journal article or a newspaper article, anything that comes from online, you have to have the full URL. That means if I'm using something from the website WebMD, I'm looking up acupuncture on WebMD. The link that I provide in my reference entry won't just be www.webmd.com. the link I provide in my reference entry will be whatever was up in my browser window when I was on that page for acupuncture. I will show you what I mean by that here in a little bit, but you're going to need that full URL if it's an online source. You're going to need all that information for pretty much any type of source you're using. Now, how it gets put into a reference entry, that is a little, that differs depending on the type of source. But this is general information that is required. Because think about it again, what you're doing in the reference entry is showing your reader how to find your source. So how can we make that easy for them? We give them the author's name, if there is one. We give them the date of publication. We give them the title. And if it's an online source, we give them the full URL so they can click on that link and be taken straight to that spot where you found your information. So, of course, this type of information is going to be needed in every source. So you can kind of get a feel for that. Like, okay, I don't know exactly how to format an online newspaper article, but I bet I'm going to need this information for sure. I don't know how to format a section of the World Health Organization's website, but I know I'm going to need as much of this information that I can find, right? And there will be instances where there is no author associated with the material you're using. There is no date of publication provided. And there are ways to format an entry when you are missing some of these elements. But if these elements are provided, you can bet they're going to be in the entry somewhere, right? Let's look at some templates and examples for some commonly used sources, right? Books, right? Although probably not quite as common these days with the way the internet exploded and changed how we conduct research. But you never know. Books, you can, because this applies to ebooks as well, right? So books, here is the template, right? For how to format the reference entry of a print book, so a book you can hold in your hands. The first piece of information in the entry will be the author's last name, then a comma, then their first initial and a period, and if given, their middle initial and a period. Then in parentheses, the date of publication, then a period, and then in italics, the title of the book, and if it's a specific edition, like second edition or third edition, here in parentheses, not in italics, you put what edition it is, then a period, then the publisher, then a period. So here's what that template shows us when we are using a real example. So we are reading this book called Behave, The Biology of Humans at Our Best and Worst. It's written by R.M. Sapolsky. It was published in 2017, and it was published by Penguin Books. So now we look at the template and we just plug in the corresponding information. I know that the entry needs to begin with the author's last name. Okay, Sapolsky. And then a comma. Okay, comma. Then his first initial, R, period. Middle initial, M, period. Now I know in parentheses, I need my date of publication. Okay, parentheses, 2017, close the parentheses. Oh, a period goes after that parentheses. Put my period in. Then I know the title of the book has to go in italics. Okay, Behave, The Biology of Humans at Our Best and Worst. Oh, I'm not using a specific edition. This is the first edition, the only edition, so I don't have to worry about putting that in my entry. But I know that a period comes after the book title and the edition, so there's my period. And then in regular font again, I put the publisher, so Penguin Books, and then I end it with a period. There's my period. So the template just shows you where to place each piece of information that's needed for the entry. If it is an ebook, right, then you just add the URL or the DOI, and DOI refers to digital online identifier. And this happens a lot with journal articles, especially, but it's definitely there for ebooks as well. And it will show you, like when you're looking at the source, like, you know, you go to the ebook, if there is a DOI associated with it, it will be visible, right? Journal articles as well. It's up towards the top, right? You'll see DOI, and then this, and then it'll be like a series of random numbers. So, you know, for this particular example, right, this ebook, The Psychology of Prejudice, From Attitudes to Social Action, it does have a DOI associated with it. So that's what I'm including in the entry. If it didn't have a DOI associated with it, I would just provide the full URL of where the ebook is found. So before we go any further, let's look and see what I mean by DOI. One moment here. Okay. Okay, so going back to my example with WebMD and acupuncture. You know, I'm here on this section of WebMD that says, what is acupuncture? This is where my full URL is, right? It's not just webmd.com. It's webmd.com/pain-management/ss/slideshow-acupuncture-overview. And there are some full URLs that go all the way across this web address window and keep going. You can't even see the end, right? So how do you get the full URL, especially, you know, if it goes that far? You are not going to want to try to manually type this whole URL. You're going to bring your cursor up here, click on it, double click, sorry. See, it highlights the whole thing, right click, copy, and then you can paste that into your document where you're creating the entry. But that's what we mean by full URL. So if you have an ebook that has a digital object identifier number, you'll use that. But if it does not have a digital object identifier, you will need to use the full URL that shows up in your browser window. And it goes at the end of the entry. And look, everything else pretty much stays the same, right? Author's last name, comma, first initial period, middle name, middle initial period, date of publication in parentheses, period, title of the book in italics. This is second edition, so they included that in the parentheses, period. The publisher, American Psychological Association, period. That is the same exact format that we used for this print book, but we're using an ebook now, so we just tack on, and in this case, it's a digital object identifier. We just tack that on. Pretty easy. You just have to make sure it's the whole thing, or if it's the DOI, that you copy that correct information as well, right? What about books with two authors? Well, you pretty much use the same format, just now you have to add in an additional author. So author's last name, comma, first initial period, middle initial, and then a comma, and then the second author's last name, comma, first initial period, middle initial period, right? That's it. Don't list, don't put the authors in alphabetical order unless that's how it appears originally. So like in our example here, right, the first author that's listed for this source, when I'm looking at the article and it tells me who the authors are, this person is mentioned first, Benson. And then Lober is mentioned second. Alphabetically, Lober comes first, right? L comes before S. But I'm not gonna put Lober first in my entry. You list the authors in the order they appear. So since Benson was mentioned first, I put that last name, comma, first initial, period. We don't have a middle initial. And then a comma, and, right, ampersand. And then second author's last name, comma, first initial, period. So we use the ampersand to indicate, so that the reader knows this isn't just one person's name, really weird name. It's Svensson S and Lober L. The rest of the entry remains the same, right? Oh, hold on. This happens to be a book, an ebook that doesn't have a digital object identifier. So we had Svensson S and Lober L 2020, the big picture / academic writing, the 1 hour guide, 3rd digital edition, close out the parentheses, published by Hans Reitzel Verlag. And then this is the full URL for that book. What showed up, the whole thing that showed up in my browser window. Pretty easy, right? First author and second author. The rest of it stays the same. What if you have a lot of authors? If this is funny, if a source has 20 or less authors, you list all of them in this same format. Last name, comma, first initial, period, comma. And since there's, we only use the and when we're at the end of the list. So, we've got last name, comma, first initial, period, comma. The next author, last name, comma, first initial, period, comma. Third author, Fisher, comma, first initial, period, comma. Fourth author. It's tedious, but this is how it's supposed to be done. You list up to 20 authors. If there are 20 authors, you list every single one of them. If the source has 21 or more, you list the first 19, and then you use an ellipses, which are these 3 dots here, dot, 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 and then the last author on the list. So you still end up with 20 names, right? So like, if it had 20 authors, you list all 20 of them. If it has 21 authors, you list the first 19 and the 21st. Still a total of 20 that are being listed. Crazy, right? But once you get past that really long list of author last names and first initials, you then get the date of publication, the title, right? And the URL. What about a chapter in an edited book? All right, so this could refer to a textbook more than likely. Maybe you're only using a chapter from your textbook, not the whole book. Or maybe it's an edited book where every chapter has a different author, right? There's, we still have the print version and the ebook version, but it's still very similar. Author's last name, comma, first initial, period, middle initial, period, date of publication in parentheses, period. Then, before we get putting anything in italics, we put the title of the chapter in regular font, then a period. Then we write in editors, first initial, middle initial, last name, and then EDS, so indicate that's the editor. So it would be like in T.L. Trosher, EDS, if I was the author. Then the title of the book in italics. And then in the parentheses, we still put the edition. If it's a first edition, you know, you don't have to write anything then, in the page range, so that we know what pages of the book that chapter falls between. And then the publisher. So see, a lot of this information is still the same. Little bits and pieces change depending on the type of source. But we have our example here, right? So author's last name, Dillard, first initial, J, middle initial, P, date of publication in parentheses. This is the chapter title, Currents in the Study of Persuasion, in M.B. Oliver, A.A. Rainey, and J. Bryant, parentheses, EDS, to let the reader know that these three individuals are the editor of Media Effects, Advances in Theory and Research. It's the 4th edition. This chapter is between pages 115 and 129. Close out the parentheses. It's published by Routledge. So now our reader knows that this is the name of the book. These are the editors. This is the name of the chapter. This is the author of that chapter. But we're not using the whole book. That's why we don't start the entry with the editor's name. They didn't write the information in this chapter. J.P. Dillard did. That's why we still start the entry with that name, even though these three individuals are responsible for the whole book. That's why there's a difference between how do you create a reference entry for a book written by a specific author versus how do we create an entry for if we've only used just a chapter of a book that's written by someone else. J.P. Dillard wrote this chapter. These three people compiled a bunch of different authors' stuff and created a book out of it. So we still put J.P. Dillard first, since they are the person responsible for the information in the specific chapter we used. And if it's an edited book that you're reading online, what do? You add the DOI or the full URL at the end. Everything else stays the same. Right? Journal article. Gonna look pretty similar. Starting to look familiar, right? But you still come back to the template just to make sure you're doing it right. The template for a journal article is author's last name, comma, first initial period, middle initial period. In the parentheses is date of publication, then period. Then in regular font still, we put the title of the article, period. Then in italics, we put the title of the journal. And if we know the volume number, we put title of journal, comma, volume number. And if there is an issue number, then we put that in parentheses in regular font. Then a comma, then the page range. Okay? So this particular example has more than one author, but not 20 or more. So the first author that's listed is J.S. Grady. So Grady, comma, J, period, S, period, comma, her, comma, M, period. We don't have a middle initial for this person, comma, Moreno, comma, G, period. No middle initial for that person either, so comma. Perez, comma, C, period. No middle initial for that person, so comma. And now we know this is the last one coming up. Jelinek, comma, J, period. No middle initial for that one either. Then date of publication in parentheses, right? Date of publication, title of the article in regular font. So the title of this article is Emotions in Storybooks, a comparison of storybooks that represent ethnic and racial groups in the United States, period. Then we put the title of the journal and the volume number in italics with the issue number in regular font in parentheses. So the title of this journal is Psychology of Popular Media Culture, comma, volume 8, still in italics. Then we go back to regular font, parentheses, issue number 3, parentheses, and we have a comma after that, a comma, and then our page range, 207 to 217, period. Just look at the template and plug in the information. If it is an online journal article, then you either provide the DOI or the full URL. Newspaper article. Very much like a journal article. Author's last name, comma, first initial period, middle initial period, in parentheses, date of publication, period. Title of the article in regular font, period. Title of the newspaper in italics, comma, and then page numbers in regular font, period. So the biggest difference between a journal article and a newspaper article is two. One, a newspaper isn't really going to have volume and issue numbers like a journal would. Second, newspaper probably won't have a digital object identifier either. If you're reading a newspaper article online, you're just going to use the full URL. Okay. But here's our example, just to show you. So author's last name, Harlan, comma, comma, first initial, period, C, period. Apparently we don't have a middle initial. So then date of publication, in parentheses, 2013, comma, April 2nd, parentheses, period. When you're dealing with like a newspaper article, you're going to want to put the date along with the year, because a book is published in a year. It doesn't tell us the exact month or date that a book is published. And typically, we don't need that information with a journal article either, because the journal article comes in a specific volume and issue number, and that is really more important than the specific month and date. But a newspaper article, we want the specific date if possible. So that is why this date of publication has not only the year, but also the month and the date. Close the parenthesis, period. The title of this newspaper article is North Korea vows to restart shuttered nuclear reactor that can make bomb-grade plutonium, period. Title of the newspaper comes next in italics, The Washington Post, then a comma, comma, and the page numbers. This is found on section A1 and A4. Different newspapers format their pages a little differently. You'll be able to tell when you're looking. If it's actual numbers, use that. But, a lot of newspapers divide it up into sections, like, if you're reading a physical newspaper, you've got the sports section, the finance section, the entertainment section, right? And each section is dedicated to a letter. So like, the finance section might be section C or whatever. And then section C, the finance section, consists of 5 pages. So this particular newspaper article in a print newspaper, like one that we can hold in our hand. How do I know that? Because there's no URL provided. So I know that this newspaper article was, whoever is using this as their source, they read the actual paper. This particular article was found on section A1, and then it continued. It doesn't go through to A4. It's A1, comma A4. So I know that means it starts on page A1 and finishes on page A4. Right? If it online newspaper article, then you replace the page numbers with the full URL, because an online newspaper isn't going to break up their sections into, these letters, right? You're just going to provide the full URL. Please keep in mind this note down here. This type of entry, a newspaper article, especially, when we're dealing with an online newspaper, it should only be used for actual online newspapers, not a news website, right? So things like MSNBC or Newsmax, right? Or CNN, Fox, those are news websites. They don't publish an actual newspaper, not online or in print, right? So this type of source entry is when it's an actual newspaper, whether it's an online newspaper or a print newspaper. There are ways to format source material that you get from a news site. We'll look at that in a little bit, right? Okay, blog post, right? Here's our template. Author's last name, comma, first initial period, middle initial period, in parentheses, date of publication or posting, period, title of the blog post in regular font, period, then in italics, the title of the blog or the name of the organization, because there are a lot of organizations out there who have their website, and one section of their website is a blog. There are some people, individuals, who create their own blog site, right? I, as, Tiffany Lester Trosher, I could create my own blog site where I blog every day or every week or every month. So if it's a person, it will be the title of the blog. But if it's an organization that happens to have a blog on their website, then you put the name of the organization in italics, period, and then the full URL of where that blog is located. So here's our example, right? Author's last name, Ouellette, comma, first initial period, J, period. There is no middle initial. Date of publication or posting, 2019, comma, November 15th. So again, this is a type of source where you want the exact date, if possible. Most blogs will include the month and date along with the year. Some blogs don't. They just will maybe give a month. Like these are all of our blog postings for the month of March, right? If you provide as much information as you can find, if you can only find the year, then only the year is going to go in parentheses. If you can only find the month in the year, then that's what's going to go in parentheses. If it shows you the exact date that it was posted, then that's what you're going to put in the parentheses, right? Then your period, then the title of the post. The specific post that I'm looking at is physicists capture first footage of quantum knots unraveling in superfluid. That's in regular font, period. What is the name of this blog? The title of the blog, it's not part of an organization. It is a blog. So when you go to this site, it is just a blog. The title of the blog, the whole thing, is Ars Technica. So I put that in italics, then a period, and then the full URL. So if I were to click on this link, it wouldn't take me to Ars Technica's homepage. It would take me straight to the part of their website where this blog can be read, this specific post, right? YouTube video. Here's our template. First piece of information in the entry is the name of the account. You can see that under the video, posted by, right? The date that it was uploaded goes in parentheses, not the date you watched it, the date it was uploaded, Then in italics, the title of the video, right? And that's found like up at the top of the video and underneath. And then in brackets, you're going to put the word, you're going to put the word video and then close the bracket, period. And then you're going to YouTube. That's where you found it. And then the full URL for that specific video. And again, it's up there in the browser window. So here's our example. What is the name on the account? Asian Box. So Asian Box, period. When was it uploaded? 2020, comma, June 5th, close the parentheses, period. What's the title of the video? World's leading vaccine expert fact checks COVID-19 vaccine conspiracy. Stay curious, number 22. That's the whole name, the whole title of this video. Then in brackets, video, period, YouTube, period. And then this is the URL for that specific video. It doesn't take me to Asian Boss's main channel. It takes me straight to this video. Page on a news website. So this is where I was saying, the information you're looking at, if it's on like MSNBC or Fox News or Newsmax or CNN, it is not a newspaper article. They don't publish a newspaper article. It's just a website for news. So how do we do that then? Okay, well, author's last name, comma, first initial period, middle initial period, date of publication in parentheses, period. Seems like that's always how they begin, huh? Yes, it is. Then in italics, the title of the article, the title of the section you're looking at, or the title of the page that you're on within the website. That's in italics. Then a period. Then in regular font, the name of the news website, period. Then the full URL for that specific article or section you're looking at. So here's our example. We have this article, right, on this news website. The article was written by C. Bologna. Could be Bologna. So Bologna, comma, C, period. Then the date of publication. And a news website more than likely will have the date and month included as well. 2019, comma, October 31st, close up our parentheses, period. What comes next? The title of that article or section in italics. Okay. What we were reading, where we took our source material from, it was a section of this news website called Why Some People with Anxiety Love Watching Horror Movies, period. What's the name of the news website we're using? HuffPost, period. Then the full URL. So again, if I click on this link, it's not going to just take me to Huffington Post's main homepage. It's going to take me to this specific article or section, right? And again, the note down here, this is the type of entry you use when the information is from a website that is devoted to providing news coverage. They are a news website, but they don't publish a print or online newspaper, right? Newsmax does not have a Newsmax newspaper or print newspaper. CNN does not have an online newspaper or a print newspaper. They're just a website devoted to news coverage. Page on a website with a government agency or group author. Government agency, right? So our example here is from the Department of Health and Human Services, the National Institute of Health, right? So again, you still start off with the author's last name, comma, first initial period, middle initial period, date of publication, title of the article or section that you're looking at on their website, and the name of the agency and the full URL. Well, more than likely, if you're looking at information on an organization's website, you often don't find an individual author associated with that section. So in this case, you're going to use the agency's name instead. So all of this is coming from the National Institute of Health. So that is how we start the entry. Then the date, then the title of the article or section, then the name of the agency, and then the full URL. Right? All right. So this is very similar, right? So this one appears when it's a government agency. You got to know what your government agencies are. And then this one is for just an organization, right? So more than likely, there's not going to be an individual author. You're going to start with the organization's name, then the date of publication, then the title of the article or section, then the full URL. So in this case, we're using information from the World Health Organization, period. Date of publication is May 24th, 2018, period. Then in italics, the title of the section we're looking at is the top 10 causes of death, period. Then the full URL that takes us straight to this article. Okay, date published is not the same as date last reviewed. There will be internet sources where you are trying to figure out when it was published, and you might see something that said last reviewed on September 3rd, 2021. That is not the date it was published. That was just the date it was last reviewed. So you need to make sure you're using the correct date. And it's possible that there won't be one. And we're going to look at how we do that here in just a few moments. You know, and up here on this one, when it was a government agency, you know, we had the agencies, well, the National Institute of Health, and then we also had Department of Health and Human Services. A lot of times we're asked to give the author's name and then provide the website as well. But since this is an organization, we don't have to repeat World Health Organization right there after the title. Okay. If the website is the same as the author, you only need it in the author spot. Okay. The World Health Organization, date, title, URL. Okay. So if you have a web page on a website that just has an individual author, you are going to format this so similar. Author's last name, comma, first initial period, middle initial period, date of publication in parentheses, period, the title of the article or section or page in italics, then the name of the website in regular font, and then the full URL. All right, so we have this example here. We read this section, this page, why are we so obsessed with personality type? And this web page is part of Medium's website. It was written by F. Giovannetti. So how do we start the entry? With the author's last name, Giovannetti, comma, F, period. What comes next? Date of publication in parentheses. There you go, period. What comes next? The title of the article, section, or page that we were looking at on this website. We were looking at why are we so obsessed with personality types? That goes in italics, period. What comes next? The name of the website in regular font. The name of this website is Medium. Then we give the full URL. And again, don't use the date, the last reviewed date. You're going to want to use the date it was actually published. If that information is not available, you'll see how we do that in just a moment. Now, when do we need to include the retrieval date? Meaning, when do we need to include the date that we accessed this source? Only if the information on that source is likely to change. And in this case, we're looking at something from the Census Bureau. The census changes, every few years. So, we need to let our reader know the information that we are using from the U.S. Department of Commerce. We got that information 3 weeks ago. So we got it on, let's just say, July 31st, 2022. That's when we looked at the information. We need our reader to know that, because then if they're looking at this in, December of 2022, it's possible that information has changed. We just need to let them know that. But otherwise, all still very much the same. The author or organization starts the entry, then the date of publication in parentheses, then the title of that article, section, or page in italics, the name of the website in regular font, then the retrieved date, comma, from, then the full URL. Here we go. We're looking at the U.S. Department of Commerce's website, and we are looking at a section from the U.S. Census Bureau. This is the page that we were on, U.S. and World Population Clock. We retrieved it on this date. This is the full URL. Look at this, ND, what does that mean? Well, that means there's no date given. So when you're looking at U.S. and World Population Clock on the Department of Commerce's website, it does not indicate a date of publication. We don't know. So anytime you are dealing with a source where the date of publication is not provided for you, the year, because as we've seen, if you have the date and month, include that in the parentheses along with the year. But a lot of times, the date and the month aren't provided, only the year is provided. So that's what we'll put in the parentheses. There will be some sources, though, where you don't get a date, a month, or a year. We use the abbreviation N period D period for no date. So the information that we're looking at comes from the U.S. Census Bureau. That's how we start the entry. We don't know the date of publication, so in our publication parentheses, we put in period D period. Close our parentheses. The page that we're looking at is titled U.S. and World Population Clock. It comes from the U.S. Department of Commerce's website. We looked at this information on January 9th, 2020 from this URL. Plug in the information. What if we have something with no author? Well, normally our entry begins with the author's last name, right? Or the organization's name, or the videos, or the video creator's name, whatever the blog writer's last name. In this case, we don't have an author at all, not even an organization. Well, then you start the entry with the title of the article. So I'm looking here at an article called All 33 Chile Miners Freed in Flawless Rescue. I'm reading it on the MSN website, but there is no author provided. Well, I still have to put this source on my references page. So what do? I start with the title, All 33 Chile Miners Freed in Flawless Rescue, period. Then the date of publication in parentheses. And now I don't put the title again, because normally we start with the author, then the date, then the title. But in this case, I had to start with the title because there is no author. So title, date, website, MSN, period, then the full URL. Right? Now, you might be tempted to say that an article with no author is written by anonymous, but that is not the case. You only use anonymous as the author if the piece was actually signed anonymous. No author provided is not the same as an anonymous author, right? So if you're reading an article on a website and there is no author provided and it's not part of an organization's website, then you're going to begin with the title, right? What if you have no date? Again, we kind of looked at this already, but just to show you, again, we start with the author's last name, first initial, middle initial. Then in the parentheses where the publication year would go, we put in period D period. Stands for no date. Everything else is the same. You don't just skip it because there's no date. You don't just skip the parentheses. You still have the parentheses for the publication information. You just put in period D period. What if you have no author and no date? Well, you start with the title of the article, you put the ND in parentheses, and then you go from there. So I'm looking at the section on neurology on Wikipedia. How do I cite that? Well, I don't have an author's name, so I'm going to use the title of the section that I'm looking at. I'm looking at neurology. Okay, what comes next? It should be the date of publication in parentheses. I don't have a date of publication, so I'm going to put in period D period in my parentheses. Then the name of the website. Okay, I'm using Wikipedia. Then the full URL. There you go. Now, that was a lot to get through, right? Don't feel bad if your head is spinning a little bit because it's you know, it's so much to take in, and then the differences are so slight. It's almost impossible to keep track of. But I hope you could at least see that for the most part, there were some very common pieces of information that were required in every single type of entry. And they kind of followed the same order, you know? Yeah, a book is different from a journal article. A journal article is going to have a volume and an issue number associated with it. But still, we're going to start with the author's last name. We're going to put the date of publication in parentheses. We're going to put the title in italics. You know, like it's some of the information and the order that it goes in is pretty similar. There are just some tweaks that you make here and there, depending on the type of source it is. And then a couple of bigger tweaks you make if there's no author or no date of publication provided. But I've given you the templates for all of those. You can come back here and create it for yourself. We're going to do that here in just a moment. But there are some resources that you can use when you are creating reference entries, besides just looking at my PowerPoint at the templates. Looking at the PowerPoints with the templates is a good way to go because you already have easy access to it. And if you are plugging in the information manually on your own, you are ensuring that you're doing it correctly, hopefully. But there are some other resources available to you. These two, or sites like them, use with caution. And these are like Citation Machine, easybib.com. These are websites where you can input the information from your source. It'll say, who's the author of this source? What's the title of it? When was it published? What edition? You know, what's the URL? And it will create the reference entry for you, and you can copy and paste that into your document. My experience is this. Citation Machine and EasyBib are fairly accurate when it comes to sources that have every piece of information needed. So author, date, title, URL, all of it. But if you have a source where especially if the author isn't provided, the entry that these websites give you is kind of wonky. um, so use them with caution. If they're helpful, you know, there's nothing wrong. Like I said, you aren't responsible for memorizing how to create the proper entry for every single type of source. You know, there's nothing wrong. It's not cheating to use a website that creates the reference entry for you. It's just use it with caution because it might not be correct. If you are using a source, especially from a website that doesn't have an author listed, I would do that entry manually. But if you have a journal article that has the author, has the year, the date, has the title, has all of the information you need, go ahead. Go ahead, use EasyBib, use Citation Maker, let them do the work for you. Nobody cares if you are creating it on your own, because I'll tell you what, there are some journal articles you can go to, especially like scholarly peer-reviewed online journals, where when you're on that article, you know, you'll have the title and the authors up at the top. There'll be a little section over in usually the top right corner where it will have a button you can click that says cite. You click on that button and you get a little pop-up window that shows you, how do I cite this article in MLA format? How do I cite this article in Chicago format? How do I cite it in APA format? You find the format you need, and it shows you the reference entry and the citation. Use that to your advantage. You know, this is not cheating. It's not cheating. It's being smart, right? But again, those particular types of websites that create it for you, use with caution. If it's the actual online journal article that has that cite button, you can trust that. All right. Purdue Online Writing Lab, they have a whole section devoted to APA format, shows you how to do the templates for the different types of sources. You can use that, plug all the information in yourself, do it manually. APA's website is obviously super reliable, but again, it's only going to show you the template, and then you have to plug in each piece of information and create it manually. But then you'll know it's correct. There is also a feature in Microsoft Word where you can switch to APA format, and it will help you create the reference entry. And again, it's kind of like these citation makers up here, though, where you have to make sure you're putting in the correct pieces of information in the correct spots, or the entry it could give you back might be a little wonky. But it's there. Use it. Use it if you want to. If you if it's helpful to you. But these are all different ways that you can make it a little easier on yourself to create the reference entries for each type of source. You do not have to memorize the formats. You don't have to memorize the template. Just know, hey, I'm dealing with a book. I know there's a specific way to format the reference entry for a book. I should go look that up and then plug in my information to create my entry. I'm using a YouTube video. I know there's a specific way to format the reference entry of a YouTube video. Okay, let's go look and see what that format is. Plug in my information, create my entry. That's all you have to do. Don't feel like you have to memorize all of it. And when you run into trouble, Purdue Online Writing Lab is pretty good. APA is excellent. These two, use with caution. If it's not cheating, it just might not be totally accurate. Right? Now, let's practice. We are going to practice creating reference entries for a few different sources. Okay? So we have a book, right? Only has one author. The book is titled Psych. The author is A. Spencer Rathis. It was published by Cengage Learning in 2015. So that's all the information that I have acquired about my source. I know that the template for the reference entry of this source is author's last name, comma, first initial period, middle initial period, parentheses, date of publication, close the parentheses, period, the title of the book in italics, the edition in parentheses, in regular font if there is an edition, period, and then the publisher, period. Oh, whoops. I'm going to need it to big. There we go. All right, so I know I start with the author's last name, so Raffus. I don't want it to be in bold. Raffus, comma, first initial is A, period. Middle initial, looks like the middle name is Spencer, so that would be S, period. And I know I have my date of publication in parentheses next. It was published in 2015. Close my parentheses, put my period. I know my title of the book is going to come next in italics. So I'm going to put myself in italics. The title of the book is Psych. Right? Take myself out of italics. I don't have an edition associated with this book, so just the title in italics and then my period. What comes next after the title of the book? Edition, oh, publisher. The publisher was Cengage Learning. Period. That's my reference entry for this source. Right? Now, we have a book that has at least 2 authors. Okay. I have this book here. It's called A Pocket Style Manual. It's written by Nancy Summers and Diane Hacker. Published in 2016 by Bedford St. Martin's. Okay, looks like I have most of what I need here. So where is my author's last name? Nancy Summers is listed first, so Summers, comma, in, period. And then my ampersand, because I only have 2 authors, and Hacker, comma, the, period. I know my date of publication is coming next, so that's 2016. Close my parentheses, period. I know the title of the book is coming next in italics. So the title of this is a pocket style manual. I don't have an edition associated with it, so just my period. And then what comes next after title of the book? The publisher. This was Bedford St. Martin's. Period. There you go. I used the template to plug in the information and create my entry. Okay. Now we have an online journal. Wow. I think I'm going to make that a new word. An online journal article with 1 author. I have my URL where it came from. The name of the journal is Life Science. The author is Steve Wanjek. The title of the article is Secondhand Smoke Kills 42,000 Non-Smokers a Year in U.S. It was published on September 28, 2012. Here is my template. All right. So how do I begin? I begin with my author's last name. That was Wanjek. All right, Wanjek, comma, first initial is C, period. Looks like my date of publication comes next in parentheses. That was 2012. comma, September 28th. Close out my parentheses, period. All right, what comes next? The title of the article. All right, so the title of this article is Secondhand Smoke Kills 42,000 non-smokers a year in U.S. What comes after the title of the article? A period. Okay. And notice that I'm not capitalizing everything. The only thing that gets capitalized in the reference entry is the first word of the title. And then first word of the title, and then any proper nouns, like US got capitalized. All right. So what comes after my title? The title of the journal in italics. So I've switched myself to italics. It was Life Science. All right. Do I have a volume number and issue number? Doesn't look like I do. I don't have a page range because this is online. All right, and then I need my full URL or DOI. Looks like this just has a URL associated with it. So I'm just going to come up here where I have copied it down and copy it down here and paste it down here. I'm going to change my font, but I can go back and fix that. All right. Okay, here's an interesting thing. When I created it here, it showed me that it was taking up more than 2 lines of text. I'm working in a PowerPoint. I'm not really going to worry about that yet. But it is something I'm going to keep in my mind. Like, if I'm going to change this over to my reference, if I'm going to copy this over to my actual references page, this is a little longer entry than some of the other ones we just created. So I need to keep an eye on that to see if it takes up more than 1 line of text once it's on the actual references page. Okay. Okay, so now we have a print journal article with multiple authors, right? So, written in the Journal Publications of Modern Language Association of America, 2018, volume 133, pages 171 to 178. The article is called The Way We Teach Writing Now, the Secondary School Perspective, and it's written by these 4 individuals. All right, so I know I start with the first author's last name. That's Laura Eddy, so E-D-D-Y, comma, L, period, comma. Next one was, I think that should be Kevin, but English, comma, K, period. And then S-H-A-U-M, comma, B, period. Then my ampersand, Andrew, hyphen, Vaughn, comma, S, period. All right. Then my date of publication, 2018, period. Then it says the title of the article in regular font. The title of the article is The Way We Teach Writing Now, the Secondary School Perspective, period. Then in italics, the title of my journal, which was Publications of the Modern Language Association of America, comma, what's my volume number? 133. Do I have an issue number? I do not. So, comma, then I'm going to do the page range, but I got to go back to regular font. The page range was 171 to 178. period. That's my entry. One more here. Make it that column. Okay, so that was YouTube video. Okay. It was uploaded on August 7th, 2020. The title of the video is Formatting an APA Style Reference List. The account holder was AskASC, and I have the URL for the video. So here's my template. I start with the name of the account, which was AskASC. So AskASC, period. Then in parentheses, the date it was uploaded, 2020, comma, August 7th, period. Then in italics, I'm going to put the title of the video, which was Formatting an APA Style Reference List. Oh, no, that's the title of video. The V is capitalizing video, so that lets me know that I capitalize it like I would normally, meaning every major word. So formatting an APA style reference list. Get myself out of italics. Oh, and then I need to put video in brackets. Okay. Video. Close my bracket, period. And I need to let people know that it came from YouTube. And then the full URL. So, copy. Okay. There's my entry. Ready to be copied and pasted into my reference list whenever I create the actual essay. And what we have here, we have, a website with an author, right? So it's from WebMD. I have the URL. The section that I was looking at was the best cities for allergies in the US, and it actually has an author, Kathleen Doheny. So I'm going to start with the author's last name, comma, first initial, period. Date of publication. I don't have one. There wasn't one provided. So what do? Lowercase n, period, d, lowercase d, period. No date. Close out my parentheses, put my period. In italics, I need the title of the article or section, which was the best city for allergies in the US. Get myself out of italics. Regular font, the name of the website, that was WebMD. And then the full URL. There's my entry. And we have one more. So this, section of a website without an author. So we're dealing with something from Wikipedia. I have my URL. The section of Wikipedia that I'm looking at is the poem Footprints, and there's no author and no date. So if there's no author and no date, I start with the title of the article. So Footprints, period. Date of publication, I don't have one. So lowercase n, period, lowercase d, period, parentheses, period. Name of website, Wikipedia, period. And the full URL, just copy and paste that right there. There's my entry. So you could see when I was up here, I started to make a mistake and then I corrected myself. I hope that shows you that you don't have to have all of this memorized. I don't have it all memorized. I have a very good basic understanding, and I kind of know how most entries are going to be generally formatted, but I still look at the templates every time just to make sure I'm putting things in the proper order, make sure I'm not leaving anything out, and to make sure that I have the correct font in every section. Is there a section of this entry that should be in italics? Is there anything else that needs to be in parentheses or brackets, right? I don't remember all of those little tiny details. I still have to come look, right? You don't have to have any of it memorized. But know that there are specific formatting requirements. You just got to know where to look so that you can see that format, fill in your information, right? So now what? Now that you know the basic process for creating reference entries for each type of source, what do you do with the entry? You know, well, I just created a handful here on the PowerPoint slide. You would probably be doing it in like just a Word document that you created just to keep track of your sources, or maybe you're even handwriting it. But what do you do once you have written the essay and you need to put your reference entries in there? Then you create the references page. And actually what I would say is create the references page first, even if it's not in the document yet, and it's just over here by itself in another Word document that you're eventually going to copy and paste in the document, your essay document at the end of the essay. Create the references list first, so that way it will help you with your citations, which we'll look at in the next lesson. But you got to create the references page. Yes, you created the entry for each source, but now what? All right, so let's look at this one right here real quick. Okay. So what I have here is a little mock essay in APA format. I didn't want to put just the references page as the handout because I didn't want to mislead people into thinking that your references page is supposed to be a separate document. It is still part of the essay. So I showed you here, a mock title page with my page numbers, right? Here's my title, page 2, and you can read through this. It's really just reminders of what each section of an essay is supposed to do, right? And then you keep going, you get to page 3, the essay concludes, keep scrolling, and then page 4, my references list begins. Now, nothing up here in this section actually talks about these sources. It was just a way to show you how the essay should look, that you start with that title page, you write the essay, and even though I still had room left here on page 3, I come to page 4 to begin my references page, right? So it starts on the last page after the conclusion. I put the word references in bold and centered on the first line of text. And then each of these entries corresponds to an entry that I just created in the PowerPoint, the practice slides, where you saw me in real time manually creating each entry. That's what these are. So I created those, right? Those 7 entries. What do I do with them? Well, I put them here on the references page. I list them in alphabetical order according to the first word of each entry, right? This YouTube video was created by Ask ASC. So that's how the entry starts. This one was, this section of WebMD was written by Kathleen Doheny, so Doheny, K. I look at all of my entries and I list them alphabetically according to the first word. For 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of 7 of these entries, the first word is an author's last name because authors were provided. This one, it's a YouTube video, so we don't put the author's last name or a person's last name. We put the channel name, the creator name. This one right here doesn't have an author provided for it. It's just a poem that you can look at on Wikipedia. So when I made my reference entry, looking at the template, it told me this entry begins with the word footprints. So I use alphabetical order to list each entry. This entry took up more than, well, here, we'll look at this one. This entry right here, this is the really short one, the very first one I created. It only takes up one line of text. When we come down to the next entry, there's no extra space though, just the next entry starts. How did I know that, or how does my reader know that this is one source and this is the next source if I don't number them, if I don't put extra spaces between them? How does my reader know where one source ends and the next one begins? That's where the hanging indent comes in. When you begin the entry, you start over on the left side. If it comes down to a second line, you indent, right? And you would do that for every additional line. You don't come back out to the left until you start the next source entry. So hanging indent is how we let our reader know where a source entry is beginning and then when it's ended. We know it ended because a new source has started out here on the left. So hanging indent if it takes up 2 or more lines of text. Alphabetize the entire list according to the first word of each entry, no matter if that first word is an author's last name, an organization, or the title. Doesn't matter. Whatever the first word of the entry is, that's what you use to figure out the alphabetical order. You don't number them. You don't do anything like that, right? The whole thing is double spaced because the whole essay, remember, APA format, everything from the title page all the way through the references page is double spaced, right? Yeah, and then you have your references page. This is what it would look like at the end of my essay. All right, so again, remember you don't need to memorize how to format each specific type of entry. You just got to remember that there are differences, and then you can go to a resource to figure out what the differences are, what you need to do for this particular source. How do you create the entry for this particular source? Creating the entry is only half the battle, because then you have to make sure that all of your entries are on a references page in proper APA format that comes at the end of your document. All right. Once you create the reference entry for every source, you have what you need to create your citations. So again, I encourage you, create your reference list first, even if it's not in your document yet. Create the reference entry for every source first, so that when you do get around to typing up your rough draft, you will have everything you need to create a proper citation. We're going to learn about the citations in the next lesson, but I am telling you now, and you'll see, you'll see why I'm right in the next lesson, but I'm telling you, create the reference entries first. Use the resources available to you to help you create the entries. Use the resources available to you to remind yourself how to format the references page with those entries. Okay? All right. If you have questions, definitely reach out. I would suggest watching the next lesson though on citations, and then kind of come to me with any and all questions about the material in this week. It's possible that any questions you have about reference entries and reference pages right now might get answered in the citations lesson. Who knows? But definitely don't hesitate to reach out when it's all said and done if you need clarification or want some extra help understanding any of this. Okay. Free to go ahead and move on to the next item.